Okay. In regards to the nervous system, muscles and glands are going to be called effectors. Okay. Effectors. Okay. Nerves and ganglia are found where? Well, looking at the chart here, remember that the central nervous system is going to be the brain and spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is going to be the nerves and the ganglia. Another term for the afferent division of the nervous system, recall, afferent is also going to be the sensory nervous system. Which division of the nervous system transmits impulses from the viscera? Okay, well, remember that there's going to be two divisions of the nervous system, the sensory nervous system and the motor nervous system. Now we're transmitting impulses from organs, so that's going to be from the organs to the brain. That's going to be sensory nervous system. And we have the somatic sensory system, which is going to detect stimuli that we consciously perceive. And we have the visceral sensory system that's going to detect stimuli we typically do not perceive. So this is going to be the visceral sensory system, right? It transmits impulses from the viscera to the brain. All right, motor division functions. So looking back up here again, you can see the motor system is also the efferent nervous system. And what it's going to do is it's going to conduct impulses from the CNS to effectors. So it transmits those impulses to muscles and glands. It's going to be in charge of voluntary skeletal muscle control, so that's going to be the somatic motor system, as well as involuntary motor control or autonomic motor system. This is involuntary commands to the heart, to the smooth muscle, and to the glands, okay? A neuron conducting an impulse from the CNS to smooth muscle, such as in the bladder, would be considered what kind of neuron? We'll go back up here. So we know it's conducting an impulse from the CNS to an effector. So that's going to be the motor system. And it's a smooth muscle. So it's generally something we don't perceive. It's going to be the autonomic motor system here. I want you to know the characteristics of neurons. Know that they are excitable. Know that they can conduct signals. That they secrete neurotransmitters. I want you to know that they have a high metabolic rate. That they require continuous supplies of glucose and oxygen because of that high metabolic rate. That they have extremely long lives. Many of these cells live throughout a person's lifetime. And that they do not divide in general. Mitotic activity is going to be lost in the vast majority of neurons. You need to know the anatomy of a neuron. So you need to go back and review the dendrite, the soma, the axon hillock, the axon, and the synaptic knob. And I would even go further and review the synaptic cleft. And I want you to know specifically where the nucleus is located in all of this, okay? What is a mixed nerve? Well, recall that a mixed nerve is going to contain both sensory and motor neurons. That's what makes it mixed. All right, characteristics of acetylcholine. Remember that acetylcholine is a neurotransmitter. It is widely used in the body, and it's synthesized from acetic acid and choline. And it's going to be stored and released by the presynaptic neuron into the synaptic cleft. And recall that it is the neurotransmitter of the neuromuscular junction. So when acetylcholine is released, it attaches to receptors on the muscle cell and excites the muscle cell and causes it to contract. Glial cells that myelinate neurons in the CNS, well, that's going to be the oligodendrocytes, okay? And remember, one oligodendrocyte can help myelinate multiple neurons. Glial cells that myelinate neurons in the peripheral nervous system, well, that's going to be neurolimocytes, also called Schwann cells. And you can see that it takes the whole neurolimocyte to myelinate just a portion of an axon in the peripheral nervous system. The most common structural type of neuron is going to be a multipolar neuron. And this is where there are multiple processes that extend directly from the cell body here. Usually it's going to be multiple dendrites and one axon. Again, this is the most common type of neuron. At a synapse, where does neurotransmitter come from and what structure is it released into? Well, recall, we just mentioned a neurotransmitter is going to be stored in and released from the presynaptic neuron's synaptic knob. And it's released into the synaptic cleft. That's the space between the presynaptic neuron and the postsynaptic cell, whether that's a neuron or a muscle. The glial cell with perivascular feet that helps form the blood-brain barrier, that's going to be your astrocytes. And remember, they have these processes that wrap around the capillaries, and these are called perivascular feet. And this causes a physical barrier. It makes it difficult for cells and molecules and medicines to penetrate through the capillary. What do all glial cells have in common? Well, remember, a glial cell's job, in one way or another, is to support the function of neurons. And they all have various ways in which they do it, but they are supportive cells. Okay, which segment of the neuron would a chemically gated ion channel be found, and which segment of the neuron would a voltage-gated ion channel be found? Well, here I have a neuron. You can see this is the cell body. These are the dendrites coming into the cell body. Here is the axon, and here is the synaptic knob. You can see that chemically gated ion channels are going to be here on the cell body in the receptive segment. Whereas voltage-gated ion channels are going to be in the conductive segment, and that should make sense because it's going to be a change in membrane potential here, or a change in voltage, that causes these channels to open and close. Potassium and sodium, you need to know the concentrations of these. I want you to know that potassium is higher inside of the cell compared to outside of the cell, while sodium is lower inside of the cell compared to outside of the cell. And remember, this is going to be due to the action of those sodium-potassium pumps that pump 3 sodium out of the cell and 2 potassium into the cell. The definition of depolarization, remember, this is going to be when the inside of a neuron becomes more positive than the resting membrane potential. Another way of saying that is the inside of a neuron becomes less negative. Okay. Okay, the frontal, temporal, parietal, occipital, and insular lobes are all going to be part of the cerebrum. And I want you to remember that the frontal, temporal, parietal, and occipital lobes are so named because those are the bones that overlie them. You need to know the layers of the meninges. Know that the singular of meninges is going to be meninx. So what is the middle layer of the meninges called? Well, remember that's going to be the arachnoid mater. The layer directly in contact with the brain is going to be the pia mater. And the layer that's going to be in contact with the skull or the vertebra with the bone is going to be the dura mater. You can see this here. We have the bone here. And then underneath that, you have the dura mater, which is going to be composed of 2 layers. Don't worry too much about that. Just know the dura mater is thick and tough. And then you have below that the arachnoid mater, this middle layer. Between the arachnoid mater and the pia mater, remember, is the subarachnoid space. And what circulates in the subarachnoid space? Cerebrospinal fluid, okay? You need to know that. And then recall that the pia mater is going to be this very delicate layer of connective tissue intimately covering the brain's surface. Is the cerebral cortex gray matter or white matter? Well, recall the cerebral cortex is the outermost layer of the brain, and in the brain, the gray matter is generally on the outside. Is gray matter composed of axons? No. Remember, generally speaking, gray matter is going to be composed of cell bodies. It can have some unmyelinated axons in it, but by and large, gray matter is going to be neuronal cell bodies, okay? I want you to know the location of the ventricles. So go ahead and review. Especially know sort of in relation to other structures in the brain. Okay, so especially the location of the 3rd and the 4th ventricles. Remember that these guys are going to be the midline ones. And the 3rd ventricle is going to be located in the diencephalon. The 4th ventricle is going to be down here, sort of behind the pons, in front of the cerebellum, okay? And then you have the lateral ventricles here. So named because they are not midline. Commissural tracts are going to extend between the right and left hemispheres. Commissural tracts connect right and left brain. And you can see that here. This is the corpus callosum. And these are the commissural tracts in the corpus callosum, connecting right and left halves of the brain. What does the cerebellum do? Well, remember that the cerebellum is going to help you produce smooth, coordinated movements. It is basically always taking in information, really relaying that information to the brain so that you can adjust your skeletal movements in real time to produce smooth movements and coordination. What and where are the cerebral nuclei? Well, remember that the cerebral nuclei are going to be masses of gray matter, and they're deep in the basal region of the brain. So here you can see some cerebral nuclei kind of in the basal region of the brain. Short-term memory is going to involve the hippocampus, while long-term memory, remember, is going to involve association areas of the cerebrum. Go back and review that. Review how short-term memory is consolidated into long-term memory. What does the diencephalon contain? You can go back and review this. I want you to know these structures and their functions. The epithalamus, the thalamus, and the hypothalamus. What portion of the brain secretes melatonin and is involved in circadian rhythm? Recall that this is going to be the pineal gland. Which structure plays a crucial role in filtering out background noise and unwanted stimuli? Well, that is going to be your thalamus. The thalamus is the relay center for all sensory information, and one of the things it does is it filters out noise. It filters out the sort of the nonsense stimuli that you don't want to pay attention to. Which region of the brain has a huge influence over the endocrine system? I want you to go back and I want you to review the hypothalamus. And you need to commit to your memory the functions of the hypothalamus. What do the substantia nigra do? Well, remember, the substantia nigra is this dark part of the midbrain here. And we see a substantial decrease in that dark region in patients with Parkinson's disease. So that should give you a clue that these are going to be the dopamine-producing neurons. And dopamine has influence over motor control. Axons of the corticospinal tract cross over the brainstem at what point? Well, here we have brainstem, we have corticospinal tracts descending, and here they're going to cross over at the decussation of the pyramids. You need to remember that. The limbic system is going to be primarily in charge of processing emotions. It's kind of your emotional brain. It also helps control drives like feeding, like sex drive, things like that. True or false, the prefrontal cortex matures in adolescence? This is going to be false. Remember that the prefrontal cortex takes a long time to mature. For most people, it's still maturing well into your 20s. It does not tend to finish maturing until about age 25 in most people. The cranial nerve that innervates the heart, lungs, viscera, smooth muscle, glands, and so on. You need to go back and you need to review the cranial nerve functions. There's going to be a couple questions over cranial nerves on this exam. And one of them is going to be over this particular cranial nerve, the vagus nerve. Cranial nerve number what? The vagus nerve is going to be cranial nerve number 10. And it comes off here, and you can see it supplies multiple organs. Multiple organs. Okay, you need to know the mechanism of the withdrawal reflex. Kind of takeaways here that I want you to have. I want you to recognize that this is a polysynaptic reflex. There are interneurons involved, so there's more than one synapse involved in this reflex, making it polysynaptic. The other thing you need to keep straight is which leg flexes and which leg's going to extend, okay? So if you step on a hot object with your right foot, your right thigh is going to flex to remove your foot from the painful stimulus, while your left thigh is going to extend to give you a place to balance your weight, okay? And just try to keep that straight in your mind, because you might be asked which side does what. What do the posterior horns of the spinal cord contain? Well, Recall that this is going to be composed of axons of the sensory neurons. So you can see that here. Here's a sensory neuron axon coming up, and it relays in the posterior horn. You can see this one as well. Sensory nerve axon coming up, relaying in this sensory horn. And it's also going to contain interneuron cell bodies, which you can see here. The lateral horns of the spinal cord, these are going to contain the cell bodies of autonomic motor neurons. So take a little bit, review this figure, and really commit the location of these different neurons to memory. CF is going to circulate in which space between the meninges? It's going to be in the subarachnoid space. So what does that mean if you're doing a lumbar puncture on someone? Well, that means you're not going to see fluid in your lumbar puncture until you breach the arachnoid motor and you get your needle into the subarachnoid space. Then you'll be able to drain CSF out. The tapered end of the spinal cord. Watch lecture over chapter 14. We talk about it a little bit there. It's the conus medullaris. Conus medullaris. And it ends at about the level of L1. What does a posterior root contain? Well, remember, if we go up here and we look at it, the posterior root, not only does it contain sensory neurons, but it contains only the axons of those sensory neurons. What is a mixed nerve? Recall that a mixed nerve is going to have both motor and sensory axons in it. And are there any mixed spinal nerves? Yes. All 31 pairs of spinal nerves are mixed. Somatosensory pathways are going to convey information about proprioception, temperature, and pressure. And remember that proprioception is just a term for position in space. How many pairs of spinal nerves are there? We just mentioned 31. Which nerve innervates the diaphragm? I want you to know this one. It's the phrenic nerve. The simple knee-jerk reaction. What kind of reflex is this? Well, you can look here. Here's our sensory receptor. The impulse is traveling up the sensory neuron, and the sensory neuron synapses with a motor neuron. There is a single synapse here, so this is a monosynaptic reflex. Which spinal nerves contribute to the brachial plexus? If you've seen chapter 14's lecture, you'll know that the brachial plexus is composed of C5 through T1 nerve roots. A reflex arc in which the receptor and the effector are on the same side of the body is going to be called ipsilateral. If the receptor and the effector are on opposite sides of the body, it is called contralateral. The depressions between the folds of brain tissue, these are sulci. Sulci. Go back and make sure you know the difference between a sulcus and a gyrus. The major pathway of communication between the right and left hemispheres. Remember what connects right and left hemispheres is going to be a commissural tract, and a specific one of those is going to be the corpus callosum. And then the portion of the limbic system that's responsible for fear. Well, remember the limbic system we said is the emotional brain, and fear is one of those emotions. And the portion of the limbic system specifically responsible for fear is going to be the amygdala, also called the amygdaloid body. All right. That's it for exam 4. Should be a pretty straightforward exam. I don't expect you guys to have too much trouble with this one, but reach out to me anytime with questions. I'm always happy to help.